Good evening and welcome to the webinar on the Civil Grand Jury Explained. My name is Tracey Edwards and I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Cupertino, Sunnyvale. This webinar is being brought to you by the 5 leagues in Santa Clara County and in conjunction with the Superior Court of Santa Clara County. So I welcome you to what's going to be a very interesting hour, and I'm going to turn it over to Britney.
Thank you, Tracey, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share our slides for this evening's presentation. We appreciate you joining us to learn more about the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury. My name is Britney Huelbig. I have the pleasure of speaking with you tonight as the deputy manager who assists the grand jury in their work. Before we do get started, and on behalf of the Superior Court, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to the Leagues of Women Voters of Santa Clara County for organizing tonight's session and for their commitment to encouraging informed and active participation in government. Service on the Civil Grand Jury is in the nature of the mission of the League of Women Voters in its pursuit of facts and details to formulate positive solutions to public policy issues. We are pleased to partner with the League on today's presentation. So during this discussion, we'll focus on the Civil Grand Jury as an institution in Santa Clara County. While often confused with jury duty for Superior Court trials, the grand jury system includes a distinct watchdog function. The grand jury was identified in our original state constitution, and today's presentation will include the role and authority of the Civil Grand Jury, which is not the random postcard that shows up in the mail summoning you to appear. Instead, we'll discuss the court's active recruitment for these jurors to serve. And we're happy to answer any questions you have about this unique opportunity via the Q&A or raise hand function. We'll be joined tonight by 2 active members of the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury, Ms. Lauren Diamond and Ms. Tracey Edwards, who will share their perspectives on answering the call to serve. So what is the Civil Grand Jury? What are we here to talk about? The number of grand jurors depends on the population of the county. In Santa Clara County, we have 19 citizens who compose this one independent body. All voting is equal, and while a 4-person is appointed by the court, there is no juror or voter, frankly, in our great democracy that can be ignored or taken for granted. The Civil Grand Jury functions lawfully only as a body, and so while much of the work is done in committees, a majority of the panel must agree on all final findings and recommendations. We are going to dive a little deeper into the responsibilities of the Civil Grand Jury, but essentially the civil watchdog agency ensures the accountability of public entities and serves as a fact-finding body for public complaints. Grand jurors are impaneled for a 1-year term, but under California law, they can be appointed by the court for a 2nd consecutive term as a holdover grand juror. The responsibilities and authority of the Civil Grand Jury are specified, as I mentioned, in the California Constitution, in the Penal Code, the Government Code, case law, and Attorney General opinions. The civil watchdog role is the major function of present-day grand jurors, and considerable effort is devoted to these responsibilities. In this role, the grand jury may examine all aspects of county and city government and special districts to ensure that the best interests of Santa Clara County residents are being served. The grand jury is also authorized to inspect and audit the books, records, and financial expenditures to confirm that public funds are properly accounted for and legally spent. The accusation function is rarely used. However, grand jurors are authorized to inquire into charges of willful misconduct in office by public officials or employees, and to determine whether to present formal accusations requesting their removal from office. Most grand jury findings and the corresponding recommendations for solutions are contained in final reports describing the investigations they've conducted while performing these functions. As a county watchdog, the civil grand jury receives confidential complaints from members of the public, and these complaints may serve as the basis for a final report. Complaints may be submitted anonymously, and we do have a PDF form, which you can see here, as well as a web-based submission tool that is transmitted confidentially to the civil grand jury. The grand jury does go on to review and evaluate the procedures, methods, and systems utilized by public agencies in local government to determine whether more efficient or economical programs can be employed. Further, they are charged with inquiring into the conditions of county jails and detention centers. The grand jury is tasked with ensuring that the government is effectively serving the public. It is not the function of the grand jury to interfere with the discretionary policymaking powers of public officials, but rather to focus on those systems and systemic change that can be implemented for the betterment of local government. Underpinning all of this is confidentiality. Grand jurors take an oath that's outlined in the penal code to not disclose any evidence brought before the grand jury. They must maintain confidentiality at all times, with this obligation actually extending indefinitely. So who may the grand jury investigate? The column on the left, as you can see here, covers the main areas of focus for the civil grand jury. The civil grand jury does not have jurisdiction over the courts, state or federal government, or most private citizens or corporations. You'll notice an asterisk here regarding those private persons or corporations. The legislature in California has actually recognized that the complex nature of the grand jury's tasks requires legal advisors to be provided. These legal advisors can be called upon if a functional analysis of a private body or person is needed to determine if they are funded to or actually do perform government functions. If, for example, a nonprofit is 100% funded by the county, it may be subject to oversight of the grand jury, even if it's not a government body. But with that in mind, in terms of jurisdiction, let's take a look at how these investigations unfold. During the course of their term, the grand jury is heavily involved with the agencies and local government offices that they are investigating. All investigations are subject to majority approval of the panel, and those votes regarding investigations, reports, findings, and recommendations, those occur in confidential, deliberative discussions within the panel, and there is no outside influence on those discussions or votes. This process may include inspections and site visits, interviews with individuals, and plenty of document review. Grand jurors may also simply elect to review the operations of an agency of local government within its jurisdiction, unrelated to any particular complaint, so long as the goal is to promote accountability and to improve efficiency and effectiveness. The grand jury exercises this power through its reports and recommendations for change. The civil grand jurors themselves write these reports, which directly result from their activities and the duties they are charged with. In these reports, the grand jurors state facts that they've learned while adhering to their obligation under state law to not disclose the evidence obtained during their investigations or to reveal the names of complainants or witnesses. The reports must speak for themselves. These final reports on all of the grand jury's findings are submitted to the presiding judge of the Santa Clara County Superior Court, who's actually statutorily authorized to do so. The grand jury can issue final reports on the operations of Santa Clara County government entities and officials at any point during its one-year term. Under the penal code, every entity or official that is the subject of these watchdog reports must comment on the grand jury's findings and recommendations. All reports and responses from these agencies going back to 2001 can actually be found on the court's public website. We're going to share that website with everyone this evening. And to give you an idea of how these reports tend to come together, we've provided here an overview of the work of the last panel. So this is sort of 1 year at a glance. After over 50 complaints were received and over 250 interviews were conducted, 9 final reports were issued by a civil grand jury, resulting in 16 agency responses. And you can see here in the snippet from the public website, those 9 final reports and the corresponding responses. A wide range of agencies have been investigated in the past. From the city of Santa Clara, the Gavilan Joint Community College District, to the county's IT department. Our county has had an accusation issued resulting or involving the former Santa Clara County Sheriff. We've had multi-jurisdiction reports where a civil grand jury can conduct an investigation on issues that affect multiple agencies in the region. For example, there was an affordable housing report that really dived into some of the inner workings between local cities and towns. And we've had issues such as the lack of female firefighters throughout the county. So these issues do not have to be city or county specific. They can span the greater overarching view of Santa Clara County. So these are just a few of the reports and investigations that have been completed here in Santa Clara County. And as mentioned earlier, there are responses from each affected agency that outline how the agency will respond to the recommendations made by the grand jury. There is significant media attention given to these reports and responses. You can see on this slide some of the coverage that we've seen in our local media, but a quick Google search of the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury, I promise, is worth your time because there is quite a bit of discussion and evaluation of how this has impacted the region. A nonprofit actually recently recognized a Santa Clara County report with its Best Grand Jury Report Award. This did go to a 2018-2019 inquiry into the governance of the Valley Transportation Agency. And so looking at that one specifically, we have some media coverage up here on that. But this 61-page report recommended a wholesale re-examination of the VTA governance structure. And that was released in 2019. But after its release in 2022, local and state elected officials went on to request a state audit on the VTA and even cited grand jury reports in a June 2024 press release discussing the findings of that state audit. These can have far-reaching ripple effects on the way that local government agencies operate in our county. On the other hand, though, some reports receive less media attention but have significant policy impacts. In December of 2022, for example, the grand jury released a report entitled Conservatorships, a Case for Zealous Advocacy. The Public Defender's Office, as the affected agency, did convene an interdisciplinary working group to, in part, consider the grand jury's finding recommendations, but also to evaluate their probate practices overall. As stated in their formal response, the Public Defender's Office embraced this review process as an opportunity to improve their delivery of service to vulnerable residents in our county. So civil grand jury reports can and do lead to this systemic change for the betterment of our community. Who's behind these great reports? In Santa Clara County, like I mentioned earlier, there are 19 citizens who are recruited. We ask that all residents apply to serve on the civil grand jury. They then go on to form this independent collaborative body who are under the guidance of the court's presiding judge. So by law, the Superior Court does select the county's grand jury. The penal code authorizes the presiding judge to designate those holdover jurors I mentioned earlier, as well as a foreperson. Once impaneled, that body will serve for 1 fiscal year. And the court conducts this recruitment and selection process with the goal of assembling a panel that is representative of the entire county population in all aspects. Alternates are also selected via this recruitment and random selection process. So if there are any life events that may disqualify a juror from serving during their term, moving out of the county, for example, would disqualify you under the penal code. The alternates allow this body to continue to function. There is no outside agency or influence on this process as it is guided by the Superior Court. Listed here, we have the penal code requirements for serving on a civil grand jury here in California, as well as the requirement to ensure transparency through filing a financial disclosure form from the Fair Political Practices Commission. And so this is commonly referred to as a Form 700. It is a public disclosure document. However, the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury forms, as filed by members, are not available online. It is important to note there are only 4 disqualifiers. You can see those in the 3 bullet points we have listed here. These are outlined in the penal code as well. And then, of course, as part of the judicial branch of government, all aspects of the civil grand jury, including selection, training, investigations, are rooted in the mission of providing equitable, impartial, and efficient access. Support is provided to these wonderful citizens who answer the call to serve. Under county ordinance, grand jurors receive $45 in per diem for all grand jury activities. Jurors are also entitled to mileage reimbursement and are provided parking, supplies, software, and training. In our county, legal advisors do include the Office of the County Counsel and the District Attorney's Office, with the Office of the County Counsel serving as the primary legal advisor to the civil grand jury. There is extensive training, including with these wonderful legal advisors, but also for technical tools, Microsoft and all those wonderful things we use, report writing, and generally just what it means to be on the grand jury. Under the guidance of our presiding judge, Judge Beth McGowan, the court is currently actively recruiting applicants to serve on the 2025-2026 civil grand jury. That term will commence on July 1, 2025, and that panel will serve for 1 year. Again, that application may be found on the court website and can be submitted entirely online. We've provided here a brief outline of this recruitment process, which will culminate in a random selection on June 18 of 2025. All are invited to attend this public ceremony, and I encourage you, all of you who are interested in learning more, to either visit the court website. We're going to share my contact information at the end here. Please reach out to learn more, and or attend the ceremony and see what it's all about. And we would welcome participation from our community. At this time, though, I think I should turn over the microphone to the 2 active members who have joined us this evening. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing these slides and welcome Tracey Edwards and Lauren Diamond.
You know, Brittany, if it's okay, I'm just going to answer one question that's cropped up a few times. Yes, this presentation is being recorded and will be made available, and I'll repeat that at the end. It'll take a couple of days before it will be posted.
Thank you so much, Tracey. And so thank you again, Lauren and Tracey, for joining us this evening. Before we dive into tonight's panel discussion, I just want to provide a reminder that specific civil grand jury investigations and information not contained in final reports must remain confidential. Lauren and Tracey, I know you're well versed in your obligation around that. You've taken the oath, but we will be discussing various aspects of your role and the process. So I just wanted to note for all in attendance that case details will be left out of that conversation tonight. And so we do have planned questions that we hope to go through, and there will be time for audience questions as well. So Tracey, thank you for keeping an eye on that Q&A. Members of our audience tonight, please do submit your questions. And I know Carol has also generously agreed to help us with moderating those and making sure that we're answering every and anything that we can. And so, Lauren and Tracey, our first question is, when considering who may want to apply for this role, can you talk a bit about the backgrounds, qualities, and skills that you feel have made you or others a strong candidate?
Sure, I'll go ahead and get started. So I think from my perspective, I've got a very kind of analytical background. I'm a project manager by trade, and I have an engineering degree. But I've never worked at all with government. But I had a very strong curiosity to learn more about it. And so from my perspective, those are some of the things, just that analytical mindset, the ability to kind of dig in, do a lot of reading and research, and then just that curiosity to understand why things are a certain way, or why they should or shouldn't be that way.
I maybe add to that, Lauren. I think, as you illustrated, it's sort of all backgrounds are welcome, whether it's IT, whether it's business, engineering, accounting, teachers, lawyers, people with experience in local government, medical professionals. Really doesn't matter. Your background and the breadth of backgrounds that are available on the civil grand jury just makes it a richer and better grand jury. And if it's okay, I'm just going to think about qualities as well as specific skills that are valuable. In the world of qualities, objectivity, I think, is pretty important on the grand jury. Integrity in the process, the ability to know that you can't talk to anybody about what you're doing, the ability to hold that and be okay with it, very important. The ability to work in teams, but simultaneously have the ability to think independently, so that you can bring unique contribution, but know when you have to work as a group and reach consensus and move forward. And then knowledge of your community, all really important and rich elements to contribute to the jury. And in the skills world, I'm sorry, I'm going to go on just a moment longer. I think research skills, critical thinking skills, analytical skills, super helpful. And the skills I'm mentioning, nobody believes anybody has all of them, but bringing some of them in combination with the other members of the panel, again, really valuable. Communication skills, oral or written, the ability to work collaboratively. I sort of said that about working in teams, and maintaining a real level of respect and professionalism for the group as a whole. And interestingly, building rapport with the people you talk to as you're doing your examinations, the ability to connect, have an effective live conversation, very, very helpful. Organizational skills, attention to detail, also the ability to pull back and see big picture. So problem solving, figuring out root cause and doing root cause analysis, forming constructive recommendations, all really valuable. And technology skills. Not everybody has everything, but somebody having some of that is just very valuable to making a productive group.
I would just add just tag on to that. Tracey's right. The more diverse the backgrounds, the better off we are as a group, because there is 19 of us. So, we get to fill in the gaps a little bit, where one person might not be strong, someone else can come in and step up there. So that is really, really important.
Wonderfully put. Thank you for sharing. So let's talk a little bit about time commitment and the way the work is structured. Lauren, can you speak to this from your perspective?
Yes. So I would say, in my experience, that we say it's an average of about 30 hours a week. And that definitely kind of ebbs and flows. So early on in the term, we spend a lot of time, as Brittany talked about, training, just getting to know each other and how we can work together as a group. And then we start to really dig into sort of the meat of the process where we're looking at complaints and having these discussions. And that's more like the second quarter, I'd say, of the term. Um, and then the last half, I would think, is where we're focused on report writing. And that's where things can get a little more intense, a little more, yeah, we'll leave it at intense. It's definitely a very collaborative process. Takes a lot of time, and yep, that's where things will get a little more involved. But overall, I think you just have to be, as a jury, we're pretty flexible time wise. And so, yeah. Tracy, did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would I would add the modality of how we work.
Mhm.
So the the work of the jury, and I'm the novice here. Lauren did it the prior term and is now the foreperson for the current term. But the work is really done individually or in groups. The real work of investigating and writing things up and thinking about stuff. But decisions are made collectively and only collectively. And so when I was thinking about this, it's for those of you that have experience working on boards, it's just like that. There's a phrase that the work of the board is done in committees. Well, the work of the jury is done in committees and done individually, but the decisions are all done collectively and in the group of 19. Um, I think that's all that I would add.
Well, so in terms of that work, would either of you say there's a requirement or a balance between kind of virtual versus individual versus in-person work?
I would say that we try to be really flexible as a jury. Each panel is going to be a little bit different in their preferences, but for the most part, we really encourage remote work. We do come together as a panel regularly. This panel we do monthly in person, but overall, for the most part, we're doing remote work, and we're doing, like Tracy said, a lot of individual kind of researching, digging into things, doing a lot of reading on your own. So time-wise, yes, it's definitely flexible, and it is a year-long commitment. So there's obviously people are going to have things that come up, vacations, people are ill, and so that's again where there's the 19 of us could really kind of come together and fill those gaps in. So there is a lot of flexibility, and that was actually one of the main reasons that I signed up for this in the first place, was because of that flexibility. So.
And as you just speaking, Lauren, what I would add is the bonus of how we work and an unexpected delight of the way in which we work for me anyway, and that is that ability to connect with a couple of people working on a project and really doing very interesting brainstorming, collective problem solving, designing, figuring out what's next, building questions for interviews. That is very rewarding to be able to bounce it off people that are open to it, that you can work with, and just really a very pleasurable way because you're moving something forward, you're making progress, you're ending up with a better work product.
Wonderful. And I know one question that we hear a lot here at the court and on this topic of organizing work is how you decide these things. How do you determine committees? How do you decide? I see there's a great question in the chat about having interviews. How do you make those decisions as a body?
Sure. So again, each panel is going to be unique in how they decide to operate. And that's, those first few months are spent kind of making those decisions. But in general, we'll have some standing committees that'll take on tasks like, administrative tasks, an editorial committee, a complaint committee, just separate groups that are kind of standing meeting every week, just to handle those tasks. And then as we start to get into specific complaints and start discussing certain topics that we want to investigate, we will vote as a plenary to take on a particular investigation, and then we'll ask for volunteers to join a specific committee. So we're only looking for people who really have an interest in that specific investigation to join. And then from there, again, we just organize, we'll elect a chair and, just start brainstorming and figuring out, okay, let's start making a list of all of the people that we think would be helpful to talk to. And that list changes every week as we start to, learn more, we do more research, we do our first couple of interviews. And it could be that, we thought we were going in this direction. And then all of a sudden, after a couple of interviews, you realize that, it's actually over here that we should be looking. So it's very dynamic, and yeah, that's.
Would it be okay if we address just a few questions about the topic we just covered that came through in chat? One question, and let me just ask it to you guys. Are most jury members also working regular hours in their jobs?
So it depends. We have previously, and I'll let Brittany speak to this, have someone who was working full time. But a lot of our members tend to be retired, especially recently retired, and are looking for some things to fill their time. So it kind of varies. I think on our panel this year, we do have a few people that are continuing to work. And it's definitely doable. Again, it's just about that flexibility. So as far as working like a typical 9 to 5, if there's an expectation that you're going to work outside of those hours, that's probably unreasonable, because we do try and get most of our work done, or at least our meetings done, during court hours. So, we do have to have people available during those hours. But other than that, there is some flexibility around that. And I'll let Brittany kind of talk to.
Thanks, Lauren. So the breadth of the grand jury's role and the responsibilities and the duties that this body is constitutionally mandated to perform does require a significant time commitment. It really is. I see there's some feedback in the chat about 30 hours. The court generally says it's more like 20 to 25, but the wonderful panelists that we have tonight certainly know more about that this year than I do. But as I think we covered very briefly, this ebbs and flows. And so grand jurors can and do take pre-planned vacations, spur of the minute trips. We have had students serve on the civil grand jury. We've had working professionals. There are mandatory trainings and the ceremony, for example, that occur during the court's business hours. And it is partially a function that being administered by the court, we operate Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., excluding holidays. And so we also encourage grand jurors to have that balance in their workload as well. Tracey, is there anything about that time commitment or kind of speaking to the?
No, I think it's up to the individual, right? I think that I maybe say it's closer to 30, but there are people that don't choose to put in 30 hours, and there are people that choose to put in more. So it's what you volunteer to do. Everything is voluntary. There's nothing mandated or assigned. You raise your hand. So you can shape it, and you can also, as it's been mentioned several times now, if you have something that's planned, absence that's coming up, people will work around that. I'm just going to try to sneak in a couple more here. Somebody asked, are the monthly in-person meetings on a particular day and week of the month? And the answer there, it depends on the grand jury that year, what they choose to do. Our grand jury does meet the same day of this. It doesn't matter the when, but it's always in the same rhythm in each month. And that's constant. And there were several questions about 30 hours, and we've hit those. And I think we're going to hit a lot of these other ones as we go on. And there
Excellent.
is one, I'm just going to say, it doesn't matter if you're a league member, it won't make a difference when you apply. But
We
you
are
are, but your league members are just excellent candidates to apply. You're engaged and you care about this stuff. So please do apply.
And Tracey, I think you make an excellent point about it being self-selected. I think we heard earlier in the presentation that Lauren is currently the foreperson, and so she has taken on that appointment. Each grand juror really does have discretion to sign up for assignments if there's a particular piece of your background that has put you in a position to feel comfortable. For example, with Excel, maybe you sign up to be doing some of the data crunching, the reviewing of spreadsheets, and that workload might look different than someone who volunteers to, for example, set up interviews. And I saw there was a question about being able to interview relevant persons at the county in an investigation. And yes, the grand jury is statutorily authorized to conduct these interviews. There is subpoena power, and the civil grand jury can receive confidential legal advice if they suspect that there's information being withheld. But Tracey, I think you're right that we have a couple other of these questions we'd like to get to. So I'm wondering if you can please speak to how training informs the work of the grand jury.
I'd be happy to. For me, it was an unexpected benefit and a relief to learn about the amount of training that was provided. Just quickly, sort of at the get-go, there were 4 days of training. 2 were virtual, 2 were in person. It really took a very high-level view of all things civil grand jury, how it worked, what we did, resources that are available. Admittedly, it's drinking from a fire hose, but when you refer back to it, you have the materials, you can look at it, you can look things up, and it was a really good foundation for the work that was to come. There are also business writing classes, report writing, the reports that the grand jury publishes, conflict resolution techniques that's just generally valuable, bias training or implicit bias training to avoid implicit bias. A lot of training on technology. The grand jury uses the Microsoft Office suite of tools for Teams, so learning how to use those if you're not familiar. An ongoing presentations by both senior executives in various organizations as well as elected officials, which is just terrific. But in addition to that, and by the way, I said it was unexpected and a relief because when I signed up for it, I had no idea how you learn to do it, how you learn to be a civil grand juror. And I think that was quickly revealed that you get trained on how to do it, and there's more than adequate material to rely on and people with the experience to ask questions of. But I think there's also a massive amount of informal training. And that just comes from the investigations that you do, the people that you interview, and what you get to learn. And that's just fascinating. And when I was, excuse me, when I was applying to the civil grand jury and was being interviewed, it was mentioned to me that the civil grand jury was like having a master class in civics. And I would just say that's exactly what it is. You just develop such a wonderful understanding and knowledge of how our county and all its agencies and cities and everything else really work. Its challenges, its excellent performance, just a real wonderful understanding. So that's why if you have a civic bone in your body, this is just a wonderful thing to jump into.
And I would just add to that, well, as a holdover, I think there's a big benefit in having some of those people who have gone through it already. I learned so much in my first term, and so I kind of have some ideas of what holes we might fall into, and I can share that with the rest of the jury this year, so that we can all kind of learn from our past mistakes too. And on top of that, we've got Britney, which we're very lucky in Santa Clara County to have her assisting us and kind of managing what we're doing. But she's a wealth of information, and she's been doing this, for longer than I've been on this jury, obviously. So she's got all kinds of answers, and if she doesn't have the answer, she knows where to go and find it. So, yep, as far as training goes, she's kind of our hero there. So
Very kind, Lauren. Thank you so much. And I think, Lauren, you can remind me, because you've seen this process as a holdover, which we mentioned, the court does appoint holdovers as allowed in the penal code. Would you like to speak at all to kind of that life cycle of a grand jury or a flow of the year? I think we had a slide that you maybe would like to refer to there.
yes,
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, there we go. So I kind of referenced this a little bit earlier, but we kind of break this term up into quarters. So the first quarter is all of the training, again, getting to know who we're working with, just trying to understand, get our arms around this idea of what we're going to be doing for the rest of the term. So then the next quarter, September through January, is when we start doing some of our maybe site visits. We start looking at complaints, figuring out, what this panel is interested in looking at. We start talking about report writing, so doing the training, and we really start kind of learning how the rest of the year is going to be. So that's kind of the period that we're in right now. And so starting in January, all of our investigations will kind of be in full swing. And so at that point, we're starting to think about, okay, well, what are our reports going to look like? What kind of recommendations do we think we can make based on what we know? And who else do we need to talk to before, how else do we need to verify the information that we have before we can actually put that in the report? And so those last kind of 6 months are really just a big ramp up of, kind of trying to close out our investigations, and then starting to put pen to paper or, fingers to keyboard and really start building drafts. And then from there, there's quite a lot of back and forth that happens even after we've got our initial reports drafted. So there's a lot of different approvals that we go through. So we'll go through the investigative committee. We'll go through, and once they've kind of signed off on a report, then we'll take it to plenary. Plenary will sign off. The editorial committee will weigh in on that as well. And so there's a lot of different checkpoints that we have to go through. And then, there's a legal review at the end. Brittany will help us do another review before these go to the judge for approval. So we have a lot of gates that we have to get through in this last kind of 6 months. So there's a lot of kind of timeline planning that we're doing. We have to keep an eye on that June date where the term ends. So that's kind of how the whole year goes. Like we've been saying, there's a lot of ebb and flow. Definitely a push at the end, as we try and plan as much as we can, but there's always something that comes up. So yeah.
Well, and on that note, I see a question in the chat that Lauren and Tracey, I hope to pose to you, and maybe you can help, because I think it fits into this year in the life. Do these investigations and reports need to be completed within the year, or can they be continued to the following year?
So they do not need to be completed. We are allowed to carry over investigations or complaints to next year's panel. So in that case, we would work with Brittany to, package up everything that we've learned up to this point. And then there's some penal codes involved in that Brittany manages for us in handing that over to the next jury. But if an investigation does start to take longer than we expected, then that is an option for us. And that's also an option, as I said, for complaints that come in. If we get a complaint in April and our term ends in June, it might be something that we feel is really worthwhile, but we don't have the time to start an investigation at that point. So then we can, as a jury, decide to vote and carry that over, hand that over to the next year.
Okay, and I think that is really helpful with looking at a year in the life. Tracey, do you have anything to add in terms of key transitions or milestones, things
Yeah,
that individuals should be prepared for?
yeah, I think Lauren gave a very good description of what the year rolls out like from a process point of view. But I would say that the year also rolls out like many of us who have worked on teams in business roll out and are familiar with the phases of a project of forming, storming, norming, and performing. That's pretty much what we go through. We go through those phases of figuring out how we get ourselves fixing to get ready, to start, and then to realize that some avenues don't make sense and redesign and get in the right direction, and then get down to the actual writing and drafting and issuing of a report. So it is no different than any other group coming together for would be a year-long effort. Brittany, I wonder if it's okay if we might take a couple that relate to the topical area that Lauren just covered. There were a couple of questions kind of related. What you touched on them very lightly, Lauren, but what are the powers of the grand jury to investigate? How do they do that?
So, Brittany had a slide that showed what we are, who we are allowed to investigate and who we're not, right? So, um, things relating to the county, cities in the county, that kind of thing. So, again, as a group, that investigative committee will just kind of sit down and say, all right, who would be able to shed some light on this? And so a lot of times we'll start with interviewing the complainant, just to kind of get a sense for where they're coming from, what they know. And then we get names as we keep going. So, if we start with the complainant, they may say, okay, well, these three people were involved. So then we write those names down and say, okay, maybe we want to talk to these three people. And so it just kind of builds from there. Another way we could do it is just looking at org charts. So, the grand jury can also do document requests. So if we're looking at a particular agency, we may ask for an org chart for that agency and then say, okay, do we want to start at the top? Do we want to speak to the director, set up an interview with that person? Is there somewhere in the middle that we think would be better before we go up to the top? So those are all decisions that we make in our investigative committees.
There's a few questions that are kind of related in chat, excuse me, in Q&A, about the ability to confirm data, to how do we know if people are telling the truth? Do they have to take an oath around that? How does that work?
So there is no oath. We do have a witness confidentiality form that we have our interviewees sign. And so, we assure them that this is just between us. They're not going to be named in any reports. We're not going to be sharing that we spoke to them. And so we hope that, we're getting correct information, that people are being honest with us. But we also just have the policy that every fact that we hear we have to find two different sources for that fact before we can put it in a report. So we can't just go by one person telling us something and, write a whole report on that. We'd have to confirm all of those facts with an additional source. And that's how we would, we're doing the best we can, given that, yes, there's no penalty for lying to the grand jury. In these interviews, they're not under oath. It's not a formal process, and so we're really just hoping that people, feel comfortable enough, like Tracey was saying, that we're building a rapport with the people we're interviewing, so that they do feel comfortable telling us the truths about what we're looking at.
And what
Tracey,
happens when I'm sorry, just if it's all right, what happens when a complaint comes in on an anonymous basis?
So if an anonymous complaint comes in, obviously we can't talk to the complainant. So that's when we'll start looking at, org charts and, looking up city websites, county websites, trying to find names that we think might be involved. Sometimes looking at just news articles, see who's named in some of those, and just figuring out from there. And then again, just finding one place to start and then asking every interviewee, who else do you think we should talk to about this? Who could give us more information about this? And so we just kind of branch out from there.
I'm
I
sorry.
do just want to add here that the grand jury does have the power and authority to put a witness under oath. But when we talk about putting a witness under oath, it is a different process than being admonished by a grand jury during an interview. So there can be proceedings that occur in a courtroom with a court reporter, with counsel present, and a grand jury does put a witness under oath in those circumstances. However, just to go off of what Lauren was saying, the interviews that are conducted that are not under oath, they do instead have an admonition that the witness is then under for the duration of the interview, and the witness is then prohibited from discussing the nature of the grand jury's investigation or any of the questions that were posed to them by the grand jury. And so, really staying on this topic of complaints, which Tracey, I love that you've brought forward. Can you speak to, do all complaints get investigated? Are there specific criteria that the grand jury goes through? Obviously, you can't speak to specifics of what a grand jury may discuss. That would be confidential by law. But are there pieces that you are encouraged to consider or that generally apply?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that we have to look at first is whether or not the grand jury has jurisdiction. So, we may see complaints about something that's just out of our purview, such as, the Superior Court or, a particular judge, something like that. We don't have purview over that area. So we would have to reject complaints that are out of our purview. And then the rest of it is just, again, very based on the panel's decisions. It's really up to us to decide if we have an appetite to take on a particular topic. So, if there's something that, really kind of piques the interest of several people, then we're more likely to pick that up and form the committee. Sometimes we see complaints that we think, okay, well, this seems like valid, but I don't know that there's anything that the grand jury would be able to do here. We don't know what recommendations we would be able to come up with that would help solve this issue. And so that's kind of some of the thoughts that we have to go through as we're evaluating the complaints. So we do not have to investigate every complaint that comes in. We vote as a plenary whether we're going to accept or reject a complaint, or, again, we have the option to carry them forward too if we want. But yes, so it's definitely, it's very much going to depend on the panel and what the panel is interested in looking at. Because again, it's, we have to look at how much time we have and what we want to spend that time on.
We have one. I was just going to ask somebody who's off screen, Carol, I think we have one raised hand.
Hi, I just had a question. The software that we are receiving, I put it in the chat, but is it subject to any evidence rules because we're working partially from home? Is it subject to any rules because it's on our personal computers instead of like a work computer?
Brittany, I'll leave that one to you.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm happy to speak to that, Ms. Scott. So we have a wonderful Information Services Bureau, which is actually our IT department, who does work to ensure that all of the software that the civil grand jury is given a license for is on the same secure network and features that the court uses. So the civil grand jury does receive licenses for that software for up to 5 devices that they can use on their personal devices. And then we also have policies and procedures in place. Due to some of the security features, I'm not going to go into super specifics, but I can tell you that there's password protection on documents. We have cloud-based storage systems that have permissions set up so that links or other pieces that are shared can only be accessed by members of the grand jury. And we also are able to provide on-site networked computers that fall under the court's security policy as well. So there are, aside from that software perspective and the hardware provided, there is also legal training. And then I don't know this hero that Lauren speaks of, but there is some court orientation to help walk you through how to protect the evidence and the deliberative materials that you'll be working with as a grand juror. So it's certainly not, there's not a public Wi-Fi, here's some confidential information, run and you've got it. We take very methodical steps to ensure that all of the grand jury's documents, evidence, their working product is protected. And often, like I mentioned with the passwords, there are there's many steps to that protection. Does that?
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to answer one question here. It's come up twice. The question is, some people seem to be able to use chat, others seem to be blocked. Everybody is able to use Q&A, and all the participants are not able to use chat. So if you're writing a question, we are seeing it.
And building off of that, thank you, Tracey. I know I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I want to drop in the chat a handout that we've prepared with information on the civil grand jury. This information is intended to help address some of the questions. We also have links to videos where you can learn more. There are a ton of great questions in the Q&A right now, but I know we have a minute left. So Tracey, I'll defer to you as if you feel we can answer Ms. Yick's question. And I know you'd like to close us out this evening as well.
Yeah, I think there's one that came up that I think we should answer. It says because this comes up to us, if the panel decides not to address a complaint, does the grand jury let the complainant know why?
No, unfortunately, we cannot share any of that would be part of our deliberation, and so that's confidential to the grand jury. So the only time at this point where we can let someone know is if it's not in our jurisdiction. So we can share that as a reason to reject a complaint. Otherwise, no, there's no communication about why we decided to do something or not do something.
And thank you, everybody. We had many wonderful questions. I know we did not get to all of them, but we do want to be respectful of the amount of time we blocked for this. And we have just a couple more slides to go through. So I'm going to ask Britney if she will help close this out.
Thank you, Tracey. And these are excellent questions. My phone number is included on the handout that I shared, and we are actively recruiting. If any of this sounds interesting to you, even if you just want to learn more about the process, please reach out. The court is a nonpartisan body. We are happy to talk to any and everyone about the civil grand jury, and we certainly do want to help inform the public about the civil grand jury in our county. I saw there was a chat in there about if this is different than a criminal grand jury, and it sure is. So I encourage you to go to our website where we do have information both about the civil and the criminal grand jury. And then also, again, my contact information is listed, and we encourage you all of you to apply for service on the 2025-2026 civil grand jury.
And so with that, I'm just going to extend my thanks to everybody that attended today. We really do appreciate your participation. I hope you felt the enthusiasm we have for the experience of being on the grand jury. I don't think anybody would be disappointed in applying and participating. It is a really wonderful, very satisfying experience. And in addition to applying for the civil grand jury, if you aren't a member of the League of Women Voters, please become one. And with that, we're going to stop the recording. And again, thank you